Hello everybody, Music Theory 1, this is video 11. This is David Farrell. Today we're going to be talking about chords in inversion, both our triads and our seventh chords. What does that mean to be an inversion, and how are we going to notate it when we're doing our analysis? Let's keep watching and figure all the answers to those questions out. We've started analyzing chords in class, and we know that we have to be able to arrange the notes in a triad so that they stack up in thirds. That helps us figure out what type of intervals we have so we can determine the chord quality. And so when we look at these different configurations of notes on the screen, all of them contain the pitches F, A, and C. And just the fact that I've shuffled around where those Fs and As and Cs are doesn't change the fact that this is going to be the same triad each time. It's going to be an F major triad each time. How we arrange the notes in the chord does not change the type of chord we have. But there is one part of this arrangement of pitches that we want to pay attention to, and that's going to be whatever pitch is the lowest note in the chord. Musicians in all different traditions have treated the lowest note in the chord as a very important pitch, and what note is lowest in a chord tends to affect how the chord is used. The term we use for this is inversion. When I ask, what inversion is that chord in, what I'm asking is, which chord member is the lowest note in that chord? And the term I'm going to be using is in the bass. When I say which chord member is in the bass, I'm asking which member of the triad or seventh chord is lowest. Is it the root, the third, or the fifth? That's what I mean when I talk about inversions in triads and inversions in seventh chords. I'm asking about which chord member is in the bass, which chord member is lowest in the particular arrangement of pitches. So if we look at our first F major triad here, the pitches F, A, and C all present. F is the root, A is the third, and C is the bass. We can see that in the first voicing of this chord, F is the lowest note. F is in the bass, and F is the root of this triad. When the root of a triad is in the bass, we say that that triad is in root position. And so if I were to say, what inversion is the first chord here in? The answer would be, it's in root position, because the root is in the bass. In the next chord, I've shuffled around the notes. I haven't changed which pitches are there. There's still an F, an A, and a C. This is still an F major triad, but now we notice that a different note is in the bass. A different note is the lowest pitch in the chord. And here, it's A. It's the third of our triad. When the third of a triad is in the bass, we say that the chord is in first inversion. A first inversion triad has the third of the chord in the bass. The third is the lowest note in the chord. And in our last chord, we can see we have the final rotation of these pitches. Again, the same notes are present. This is still an F major triad. The pitches are still F, A, and C. But in this particular arrangement, we see that the C is the lowest note. The C is in the bass. C is the fifth of our chord, and when the fifth of a triad is in the bass, we say that the triad is in second inversion. This last chord is in second inversion because the fifth of the triad is in the bass. These are the three inversions that we find in triads. Root position when the root is in the bass, first inversion when the third is in the bass, and second inversion when the fifth is in the bass. Let's talk about the symbols we're going to use to indicate these different inversions. Music theory is often a history of musical laziness, and we're going to see that right now in our next section of this talk. We've got all these words, root position, first inversion, second inversion, that describe the way we can arrange pitches in our chord. But when musicians are writing these things down, they didn't want to have to write out these very, very long words, and so they came up with a series of shorthand using numbers to indicate inversions of chords. We're going to learn that system right now. Sometimes we refer to these numbers as bass position symbols. I'm going to be using that word here, and so that's what I mean. I'm referring to the shorthand that we use to abbreviate inversions. Bass position symbols refer to the intervals above the bass note. And so when we look at a root position symbol, we see that we have two numbers, 5 and 3. The 5 refers to the fact that we have a pitch a fifth above the lowest note. Here the lowest note is F, and that pitch a fifth above is a C. And the 3 refers to the fact that we have a pitch a third above the lowest note. Again, the lowest note is F, and we have an A above it. We have a note a fifth above and a third above. That means we are in root position. You can see there's an or here as well, because there's a shorthand version of these symbols. Yes, a shorter version of that, and that's to write nothing at all. If we write nothing at all, then we are indicating that a chord is in root position. The long version is 5-3, but the short version, the abbreviated version, and the version we're going to be using most commonly, is just to write nothing at all for root position chords. For first inversion chords, we have different intervals above the bass note. If I look at my bass note here, it's an A, and I have an F, that's a sixth above the bass, and a C, that's a third above the bass. The full bass position symbol for a first inversion triad is 6-3. But again, lazy musicians don't want to write all these numbers, and so it's often abbreviated to just 6. Just 6 is what we're going to be writing most of the time when we are indicating a triad is in the first inversion. Second inversion, again, has its own intervals. Our bass note is a C, and so if we look at the intervals above that bass, we see that C to A is a sixth, and C to F is a fourth. 6-4 is the long form bass position symbol to indicate that a chord is in the second inversion. And we notice that, sadly, there's no way to shorten this, right? Just 6 was already taken, and so we're always going to be writing 6-4 for our triads in second inversion. Putting these into practice, this is how I might write the names of some of these triads. For the first, I might write F with a capital M to indicate an F major triad, and I would write nothing at all to indicate that the chord was in root position. I would write that same FM to indicate F major, but I might write a 6 to indicate that the chord was in the first inversion, and I might write FM 6-4 to indicate an F major triad in the second inversion. Again, all these bass position symbols indicating the intervals above the bass note, the lowest note in the chord. That's pretty good for triads. Let's talk about how we're going to be using this same notation for 7th chords. Since there are 4 pitches in a 7th chord rather than 3, we have 4 different ways we can rotate the pitches. I've already talked about what inversion means in triads, and it means the same thing in 7th chords. It just means we're talking about which member of the chord is in the bass. And like triads, we're going to use some of the same words. We're going to talk about 7th chords in root position when the root is in the bass. We're going to use the same term, first inversion, to talk about when the third is in the bass. When the fifth is in the bass, we're still going to use the term second inversion, and now we have one new one. We have third inversion for when the 7th of a 7th chord is in the bass. Again, all these inversions don't change the name of the chord. Each time the chord has the same notes, and so it's going to be an F major 7 chord every time, but the different inversions help describe what the lowest note in the chord is. And again, this is something that's been very important to a lot of different musicians. Our 7th chords have more intervals in them, and so our bass position symbols can be a little bit busier. But don't worry, lazy musicians are not interested in writing down all these numbers. Our root position chord has 3 intervals above the lowest note. F to E is a 7th, F to C is a 5th, and F to A is a 3rd. And so the full bass position symbol for a root position 7th chord, like the one we're looking at here, is going to be 7-5-3, but again, lazy musicians, they just want to write a 7. And so when we're looking at 7th chords in root position, we're going to simply write that number 7 to indicate that the chord is in root position. That's going to be the most commonly found bass position symbol for this inversion of a chord. What about first inversion? Again, we can look at the intervals that we have above the bass note. Here, the bass note is an A, the lowest note is an A, and we can see that A to F is a 6th, A to E is a 5th, and A to C is a third. And so 6, 5, 3 describes all the intervals above the bass. But again, way too many numbers for us to write down. And so we have an abbreviated version. We tend to just write 6, 5 for our 7th chords in first inversion. A second inversion 7th chord, a 7th chord with the 5th in the bass, again has a unique set of intervals above it. Let's look and see what they are. We have C in the bass of this 7th chord, and so we have C to A, which is a 6th, C to F, which is a 4th, and C to E, which is a 3rd, all above the lowest note in this particular voicing of the 7th chord. Our full bass position symbol is 6, 4, 3, again describing all the intervals, but we want to shorten that, make it easier to write, and so 4, 3 will be the abbreviated and most commonly used bass position symbol to indicate a 7th chord in the second inversion. And finally we have third inversion. Let's look at the intervals above the bass note, which this time is the 7th of our chord. E to C is a 6th, E to A a 4th, and E to F just a 2nd. And so 6, 4, 2 describes all the intervals above the bass note. We are going to abbreviate to just 4, 2 to indicate a third inversion 7th chord. We can see all the abbreviated versions for 7th chords here on the screen now. 7 for root position, 6, 5 for first inversion, 4, 3 for second inversion, and 4, 2 for third inversion. I like to remember these as just kind of counting down from 7, right? We have 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and then we have another 4 in there before we get to 2. Here's how I might write out all these different 7th chords, all these F major 7 chords. The first FM7, again indicating an F major chord, but now with a 7th, and using that 7 to say we're in root position. If the third of my 7th chord is in the bass, I might write FM6, 5. If the 5th was in the bass, I might write F major 4, 3. And 4, 2 I might use for my third inversion of the chord. Whew, that is a lot of information in today's video. We talked all about inversions in both triads and 7th chords. When we're talking about inversion, we're talking about which member of a chord is in the bass, which member is the lowest note. And we've got a whole set of bass position symbols that we're going to be using as shorthand to communicate that information. Okay? Feel free to go back and watch this one again. Make sure you take some good notes so you're comfortable using these numbers in your own analysis. It's going to help us describe all the different kinds of harmony that we encounter in music. Going to be really useful once we start digging into some of these pieces. Thanks for watching, guys. Let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you all in class. Bye.